Hello, everyone. Grand Cruise Astrology. My name is Clayton Cruz, and today I'm going to talk to you about the nodes. The reason I want to talk about the nodes is because in 9 days we have an eclipse coming up, and that's going to start a procession of three eclipses. One starting in 9 days, and another one 2 weeks after that, and another one 2 weeks after that. So, talking about the nodes are related to the eclipses. So talking about the nodes now gives a good backdrop for the videos I'm going to do here forward about the eclipses. So what are the nodes? Well, the node in the English language literally means knot. That's KNOT, knot being Latin. So you can think of it as kind of a nexus point of energy. Um, uh, it's a place where two consequential energies come together and create an outcome. And so nodes are not planetary bodies; they're just mathematical calculations um, charting the path of the sun. Uh, so the orbit of the sun around the Earth from a geocentric perspective, the orbit of the sun around the Earth, and the moon around the Earth. They both have an orbit around a pattern that they make circling the Earth. And so when these two orbits meet each other, uh, and it's heading in the northerly direction. The moon's path is heading in a northerly direction compared to the sun's orbit. That conjunction point is called the north node. When it's going in the southerly intersection, it's called the south node. I know it's a lot, but just understand that's what is behind the calculation, just to get technical with it. Now, getting into the astrology of it, what its meaning is. Well, the nodes there in the zodiac, they you have the north node in a sign, and you have the south node in another sign. They're simultaneously inhabiting two different signs that are opposite one another. They're in polarity. So um, these nodes in their transit, they transit backward through the zodiac. So instead of going from Gemini to Cancer to Leo, they go from Leo to Cancer to Gemini. They move backward, and both nodes being in opposition to one another are moving backward at the same speed at the same time. They're staying in opposition as they move. So these nodes have they spend about 19 months in each sign, and the entire procession through the zodiac takes about 18.6 years. So that's their stay in each sign. And when they are one sign, when the north node is in one sign and the south node is another sign, and they inhabit a sign, each of them, for 19 months, that's consequential to that sign for that period of time. It's something that can be easily overlooked. All astrological traditions use the nodes. The Jyotish, the Chinese, tropical astrology, we all use the nodes and incorporate them into the system, but they can, on a day to day basis, they can be easily overlooked because they're not planets. They're not, they can just be easily overlooked. So when you're looking at the astrological chart, what are the nodes? The nodes are they look like little horseshoes. They're glyph. So when you see that little glyph of the horseshoe, the north node, like this, and the south node like this, that's the node. I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little bit about what the nodes are and their meaning. So north node, south node. So in ancient traditions, the north node is considered the dragon's head, and the south node is considered the dragon's tail. I like this imagery. There's a lot of imagery around it. The Jyotish, it was Raha, and Ketu, I think were the names, and so they had deities around that as to what their meaning is. I like dragon's head and dragon's tail. For me, the imagery is very clean. It speaks very clearly to what these energies do. Quite simply, The North Node being the dragon's head, it's taking in energy. It takes it in. It has a surge of material consequence in that particular sign that the North Node is inhabiting at that particular time. It brings in a lot. It's you can kind of relate it to Jupiter a bit, and it's very big, and it just brings in a lot, right? Um, so that's sort of the North Node. You can call it a power surge, dragon's head. It gobbles up the energy and brings it into that sign. On the opposite end, the South Node. The South Node is the dragon's tail. The South Node has to do with release of energy. Think of it as excrement, right? It craps it right out. Okay, so what does that look like in astrology? It's a power outage. It's a release of energy. And so, whereas in the North Node you have a lot of material influx and consequence in a very tangible way, in the north side of the North Node, in the South Node, it's the opposite. You have things being released, removed, things that you're letting go of, things that exit your life. Whereas in the North Node, things are entering. So in the West, Western tropical astrology has put a lot of positive connotation on the North Node because it can have a lot to do with things in the West that we value. Like it can bring in a lot of notoriety, recognition, fame. It can bring in material gain, just a lot of the more material, three-dimensional, superficial things that we we place a little bit more value on in the West. The North Node can bring that in. It can bring in more of that. So there's a certain value in that regard, but just like with everything, there's a downside to it. It can also bring in too much of something. It can bring in an overload. It can be a trap. The North Node can totally be a trap. It can be a material trap. So it has consequence in that regard. The South Node, it can be easily in the West, easily understood as, oh wow, things leaving my life. It's loss. Things going out. Well, in Eastern traditions, the South Node was considered a very spiritual point, a point of spiritual enlightenment and awakening, because things were leaving your life that were traps, things that were trapping in the material. When the South Node comes, it creates an opportunity to liberate yourself. There's a lot to do with liberation. So on the face of it, you could say the North Node, it's bringing the South Node it's bringing in loss, but on the positive, you could look at it as bringing in liberation. With the North Node, on the positive, you could say, oh, it's bringing in, a lot of gain materially, potentially, or just a lot into your space that you, may value. But at the same time, it can also, more money, more problems. It can also bring in more trappings, more things that keep you bound to the earth plane, 3 dimensions. So that's sort of a little background for what the nodes represent. Let's see what we got here, else we got on the list here to talk about. As I said, the nodes, where they are in your chart, your personal natal chart, are going to have significance. They're going to tell a story about your life. They're going to tell a story about where you, in a natal chart, in a natal sense, it talks about the South Node would refer to, a lot about past life, a lot about past in general, a lot about where you're coming from. This is how it can be understood. The nodes are a very big energy in the sense that it's not so day to day. Like tropical astrology focuses very much on, you have this planet here on this day interacting with your natal chart on this day, and this is what you can expect to happen, okay? Or today or next month or next year, whatever. The nodes are, their meaning is greater than just this life. They have They're about karma. They're about past life significance. If you don't want to think of it in terms of karma, you could think of it, the South Node as far as family lineage, and old patterns of behavior that you've inherited. If you don't want to think of it in, karma and past life, if that's not your thing, you can think of it as lineage and, patterns that your family patterns and history that you're working out through this life. That's what the South Node is. The South Node is about, sort of what you're releasing, what you're moving away from, what you may naturally be inclined to. Um, so there's a lot of sort of karma around the South Node, things that you're not going to get out of, things that you have to work with in this life. It can be sort of an Achilles heel. I mean, every chart is different. So this isn't going to apply the same way to everybody. The nodes are a very, it's kind of an advanced delineation when you're looking at a natal chart to understand what the nodes represent for each individual. It's a lot more than just the node, but that's sort of a generalization of it, the South Node. The North Node, in a general terms, represents where you are headed, the direction you're looking in to transcend the South Node, right, is the North Node. It can represent newness, the things that, may be the most unfamiliar to you in life, the things that, may be, and this is in your natal chart, where your North Node is, can represent where you are least comfortable, where you have the greatest challenge, but where you can also find the greatest triumph and greatest rewards, because by focusing your attention there, you develop a part of yourself that is underdeveloped, a part of you that, you've specifically set up in this life to work on and work through so that you can transcend the folly of the South Node. So in a general way, that's how you can think of it. There is so much nuance to this because not every chart is the same, and it's not a one size fits all thing. And not everybody is here to, we don't fit everybody into one box as far as, what their life looks like, and what they're here to do. Everybody has a different journey, but in a general sense, this is kind of how you can think of it. So, and as far as the transits are concerned, and this can apply natally too, the nodes have, in relation to the lights, which is the sun and the moon, the nodes do have preference, to what they function best with. The South Node and the sun, typically either by transit or natally, can be a challenging expression of the South Node with the sun, because the sun is about vitality. It's about energy on a physical level. It's about, it has a lot to do with consciousness and worldly influence. And so when you have the South Node with the sun, it can represent, again, a power outage or a loss of energy. It can be a loss of life, especially when there's an eclipse. Now, that's not every case, obviously. I mean, it's not, somebody who's young and vibrant and healthy. This isn't going to apply at all, right? But it can be a power outage. But it can be, a time when you want to fortify your energy and, just take extra care to take care of yourself. That's with the South Node and the sun. With the North Node and the moon, that is also a challenging, expression of the nodes. So the North Node and the moon, can bring in a lot of, it can bring too much into the mental, psychological, emotional, internal space, if you will, into your instinctual inner nature. There can just be a lot going on. You can just have that monkey mind going and get yourself in a lot of, patterns of behavior and patterns of, expression that you wouldn't normally. It can be a bit much. It can just be a big chatterbox, internally. Um, so that's sort of just a little bit when you talk about the transiting nodes. Um, I want to talk about currently what's happening in the collective with the nodes, just to give you a little bit of current perspective on what these nodes are doing. Now, we just recently, within the past month, had the nodes change signs. So the nodes, we did have the south node in Capricorn and the north node in Cancer. And that was absolutely with those eclipses in Capricorn. I've done a little bit about that in other videos. And the eclipses in Cancer, it definitely had consequence. We were definitely experiencing fallout from these nodes and the eclipses that went with them. And by the way, as I've said in the beginning of the video, the eclipses follow the nodes. They follow the sign that the nodes are in for the most part. So that's why I'm doing this video, because we have eclipses coming up. So anyway, the nodes have moved into, gosh, I got sunlight coming in from the top of the video there out of my window. Okay, well, that's interesting. As soon as I start talking about eclipses and nodes. Okay, so what we have here is we have the north node going into Gemini and the south node going into Sagittarius. Okay, so what does that look like in astrology? So as far as the collective, well, it's going to bring in more energy into the Gemini space. That means that we're going to have more focus, material 3D day-to-day focus on intellect, duality, communication, technology, seeing the trees, not the forest, right? That's Gemini. Gemini likes detail. It likes to flitter about from here to there. It likes to connect. It likes to connect dots. Gemini it considers all sides of things. It's not really too interested on the big philosophy, the big picture. It's more interested on the practical, day to day. What are we doing? What are we doing right now? How does it apply? Man, that sun is bright. Maybe if it's better. Let's do that. Okay. So it's a very sort of day-to-day energy. It can be a teacher energy. It can be a student energy. So it likes to learn. It likes to teach, but it's more on like a technical, practical level. This isn't on theory per se or big picture stuff. This is about like learning a trade, learning a skill, right? So there's probably, we're already sort of seeing this. There's energy going right now into that space right now of learning things on Zoom or learning things online, learning a new trade, a new skill, right? For this window of time that we have this lockdown, right? So this is very much in line with what we have going on right now. Okay, so that's the North Node Gemini. Well, so when we have the North Node Gemini, we're going to have the South Node in Sagittarius. So what is that? Well, that Sagittarius is about long distance travel, right? So that's kind of off the table for most of us or all of us right now. That's not something that energy is leaving that part of the chart, the zodiac right now, the Sagittarian thing. So big picture philosophies on what is the meaning of life and all this. We can be in that space with the South Node. We can be seeking to understand that internally, but there's not going to be a lot of material manifestations of what that's like. Sagittarius also rules religion and church gatherings and these kinds of things. And though some of that's coming back now, we've seen a lot of congregations in general. There's not a lot of that coming together right now. There's not a lot of that formalized expression of spirituality and religion. It's done now. We're connecting more in a Geminian way, right? Which is connecting online, connecting for more day-to-day tangible consequential things in a day-to-day sense, not so much a broad big picture philosophical spiritual religious way, right? So this is sort of some of the effects of the nodes that we're dealing with right now. This will be in place for the next 18 months or so, year and a half. And so it's just something to be aware of, because what can happen is if we get too we push too hard for South Node things right now, Sagittarian things, um, then we will tend to put in more energy into those things than we're getting back. So, I mean, just from a practical sense, it's just not a good time to try to take a lot of trips abroad and be immersed in other cultures and you know if you're going to go take a class online or something, take a class that's Geminian, which using learning how to use your hands, or learning a skill, or learning something. uh well, I mean, yeah, how are you going to use your hands learning something using your hands online, right? So I don't know, but you get my point. Do something that's more learn something that's more of a skill, more of a trade, or something that's more practical, more Geminian, more um, mental, intellectual. um, yeah, and the South Node, you can I, it's actually a good time to also go within with the South Node and Sagittarius. Go within and find that sort of part of you that needs to release things from your life that are trappings. All right, it's a good time to do an inventory and to release some of these things that are keeping you bound, and that it's a good time for liberation in that way. But again, if you're looking for outcome and material gain in anything Sagittarius, whether it's taking a trip abroad to, create some kind of tangible outcome, whether that be for business or for um, education or whatever it is, just understand that now you could be you could be, I mean, you're into the wind, right? You don't have the wind at your back; it's a headwind. So just be aware of that. So that's my bit about the nodes and what we're dealing with right now, and in that regard. So just keep that in mind over the next year and a half. What direction you have the energy coming in, what direction you have the energy going out. Anytime I talk about planets in Gemini or planets in Sagittarius from here forward, understand the nodes are also involved. And whenever there's a planet in Sagittarius, whether it's directly conjunct the node or not, there's going to be, it could signify a more challenging expression of that energy, right? So, for example, if there's, let's just say Mars in Sagittarius. Normally I'd say, oh, it's a great energy to go out and hike and, be daring and just go out on safari or whatever. But with the South Node there, it could be instead of it being, instead of you, being adventurous, this could be taking unnecessary risk. All right. With the North Node, there can be more of there, it can thing. There can be a little bit more ease, or maybe a little bit more. I don't want to say fortune, but on on the whole, in a general sense, it can be a little bit more of a favorable outcome when talking about planets in Gemini. Everything is relative, and it does depend on the planet, and it all depends on your natal chart. So these are very big generalities, but just understand when I'm talking in the collective sense, um, this is what I'm referring to as far as a little bit more challenge in Sagittarius and maybe a little bit more ease in manifesting material outcomes in Gemini. Okay, so that's the nodes there. Sorry about the sun in the coming in through the window, creating this effect on my screen there. I don't know if that's going to manifest when I put it out on YouTube, but right now I'm looking at it. It looks like there's just this light coming in. It's really, I don't know. It's really interesting for an astrology video to have that coming in. I've never done this videos at this time in the morning, so maybe this will be a new thing. I don't know. Anyway, have fun with the nodes. I'm going to do a video here in the next few days, probably early next week, about the eclipse coming up here. But until then, take care and see you soon. Bye.